There's a line in the margin of a county surveyor's notebook from October 1907, written in pencil so faint it was almost missed during archival cataloging in 1983. It reads, "Horses will not pass the oak grove. Tried 4 times. They know something." The surveyor's name was William Garrett. He had been mapping a county road expansion near the township of Millhaven in rural Dutchess County, New York. Farm country, low hills, stone walls cutting through second-growth forest. His job was to recommend improvements for a stretch of unpaved road used primarily by dairy farmers bringing milk to the rail depot in Pine Falls, 6 miles west. The notebook contains measurements, elevation notes, comments about drainage. But that one line appears without context, squeezed into a corner of a page otherwise filled with numbers. There is no follow-up, no explanation. The next entry, dated 4 days later, resumed standard survey work 3 miles south on an entirely different road. Garrett completed his contract and submitted his report in November. He did not mention the oak grove. The road expansion was approved and funded, but the planned route was quietly altered to bypass a half-mile section near a place locals referred to, without irony, as the Stillwater Turn. No official reason was ever given. In 1907, Dutchess County was old by American standards. Settled in the early 18th century by Dutch and English farmers, it had weathered wars, economic depressions, and the slow abandonment of hillside farms as younger generations moved toward the cities. What remained was a patchwork landscape, cultivated valleys bordered by thick deciduous forest, fieldstone foundations half swallowed by sumac and bramble, dirt roads connecting small townships that had seen better days. Millhaven was one of those townships. It had never been large. At its peak, perhaps 200 people lived within a 5-mile radius, enough to support a general store, a blacksmith, a Lutheran church, and a one-room schoolhouse. By 1907, the population had dwindled, farms consolidated, families left. Those who remained were stubbornly rooted. People whose grandparents had cleared the land, whose names appeared on deeds going back a century. The road in question ran northwest out of Millhaven, climbing gently through wooded hills before descending toward Pine Falls. It was not a major route, nothing more than a dirt track, muddy in spring, frozen in winter, passable most of the year by wagon or horseback. Locals used it because it saved time. The alternative route looped south and added nearly an hour to the journey. But sometime in the late 1890s, accounts vary and no single moment marks the change, drivers began to avoid a particular stretch. It was not discussed openly. If you asked, people would say the road was rough in that section or prone to washouts. Some claimed their horses tired easily there, or that wagon wheels caught more often on exposed roots. Practical explanations, reasonable explanations. But there were other things said quietly in kitchens and barn doorways that did not appear in any official record. The section in question was about half a mile long, running through an area of old-growth oaks that had somehow escaped logging. The canopy was dense. Even in summer, the light beneath the trees was dim and greenish, filtered through layers of leaves. The road narrowed there. The ruts were deeper. The air was noticeably cooler, and horses did not like it. It is difficult to pinpoint when the trouble began, because the earliest mentions are indirect, passing references in letters, vague notes in farm journals. But certain patterns emerge. In 1896, a farmer named Thomas Edgley wrote to his brother in Albany, describing an incident on the road to Pine Falls. Edgley had been hauling a load of apples in late September. His horse, a bay mare he had owned for 6 years, stopped abruptly in the oak grove and refused to move forward. He tried coaxing, then the whip. The mare planted her hooves and began to tremble. He could feel the tremor through the reins. Her ears flattened. She backed the wagon 10 feet. Before he could stop her, Edgley wrote, "I have never seen her behave this way. She is not a skittish animal. I turned around and took the southern road, though it cost me the better part of 2 hours. When I mentioned it at the store, Carl Hauser said his gelding did the same last month. Would not go past a big oak with a split trunk. Just stopped cold. The letter does not elaborate. The next paragraph discusses apple prices. Another account comes from a schoolteacher named Ada Pruitt, who kept a daily journal. In an entry from April 1898, she describes riding to Pine Falls to collect textbooks. She traveled the Northwest Road on horseback. Near the oak grove, her horse, normally calm, began tossing its head and stepping sideways. She writes, "He seemed to see something I could not. His eyes rolled white, and he nearly threw me trying to turn back. I let him have his way. We went by the long road instead. I felt foolish, but the feeling in that place was not right. I cannot say why." A third reference appears in the Pine Falls Gazette, a weekly paper with limited circulation. In July 1899, a brief notice mentions a wagon accident on the Northwest Road. A driver named Samuel Lott had been traveling alone at dusk when his horses bolted without cause. The wagon overturned. Lott sustained a broken arm. He later told a doctor he had been passing through the oak grove when the horses panicked. He saw nothing that would have startled them. They simply ran. By 1900, the pattern was established. Horses balked. Drivers avoided the section, if possible. Those who had no choice traveled it quickly, preferably in daylight, preferably not alone. No one could say exactly what the problem was. There were theories, of course. Some thought it was a smell, a predator den, perhaps, or a rotting carcass that spooked the animals. Others suggested underground water, or some quality of the soil that horses sense instinctively. A few whispered older explanations, tied to things that had happened long before. But those conversations ended quickly and were not repeated in public. What is certain is this. By 1902, the road to the Oak Grove was used only when necessary, and never after dark. The thing about fear in a place like Millhaven is that it does not announce itself. It accumulates. It shows up in small decisions, a route chosen, a departure delayed, a conversation that stops when someone enters a room. It becomes part of the landscape, like a cellar you no longer open or a field you no longer cross. And after a while, people stop asking why. In the autumn of 1903, a young minister named Reverend David Alcott arrived in Millhaven to serve the Lutheran Church. He was 28, recently graduated from seminary, earnest and energetic in the way of young men, who believe sincerity can solve anything. He boarded with a widow named Mrs. Fisk, whose farmhouse sat a mile south of town. Alcott kept a diary. His entries from that period are stored in the Historical Society archive in Poughkeepsie. Most are routine, sermon notes, pastoral visits, observations about the congregation. But in late October, he describes deciding to walk the Northwest Road to Pine Falls to visit a parishioner recovering from surgery. He set out mid-morning. The weather was clear and cool. The walk took him through the oak grove around noon. His diary entry from that day is longer than usual. I had been warned about this section of road, though no one would say exactly why. I assumed it was superstition, the sort of thing one encounters in rural places where isolation breeds peculiar beliefs. I was determined to see for myself. The grove is beautiful in its way. The oaks are very old, trunks thick as barrels, roots that have buckled the road in places. The canopy is dense. Walking beneath it feels like stepping into a cellar. The temperature drops noticeably. I could hear birds elsewhere in the forest, but not there. Not a single call. Only the sound of my own footsteps. I walked perhaps 200 yards before I began to feel uneasy. I cannot explain it better than that. It was not fear exactly, more a sense of being observed, of standing in a place I should not be. The feeling grew stronger the farther I went. By the time I reached a large oak with the split trunk, Carl Hauser's oak, I later learned, I found myself walking faster without meaning to, and then I heard it. A sound behind me, not loud, a footstep, perhaps, or the scrape of something heavy dragged across dirt. I turned quickly. The road was empty. The trees were still. I waited, listening. Nothing, but the feeling did not leave, the sense of something just out of sight, holding very still. I did not run. I am not a coward. But I did not slow down again until I was well clear of the grove. When I reached Pine Falls, I felt absurd. I had seen nothing, heard almost nothing. Yet I knew, with a certainty I cannot justify, that I had not been alone on that road. Alcott completed his visit and returned to Millhaven by the southern route. He wrote, "I told myself it was nerves or the power of suggestion, but I have not taken that road again. And I understand now why the people here do not discuss it. There are some things that resist explanation, and we are left only with the knowing." Not everyone could avoid the road. In December 1904, a mail carrier named Horace Sims was assigned a new route that included Millhaven. He was young, recent to the area, and he prided himself on punctuality. He made his deliveries on horseback, 6 days a week, regardless of weather. He used the Northwest Road. For the first 2 weeks, there were no problems. He mentioned to the postmaster in Pine Falls that his horse acted nervous near the oak grove, but attributed to unfamiliarity with the route. By the 3rd week, the nervousness had escalated. The horse began to slow as it approached the grove, ears pinned, nostrils flaring. Sims had to use his spurs. In early January, he wrote to his supervisor requesting a route adjustment. The request was denied. The Northwest Road was the most efficient path. He was instructed to continue. On January 18, 1905, Sims left Pine Falls at 3 p.m. with mail from Millhaven. It was overcast, temperature just above freezing. He was expected to arrive by 4:30. He did not. A search party went out the next morning. They found him 2 miles south of the oak grove, sitting on the side of the road. His horse was gone. His mail bag was intact. He was uninjured but refused to speak. When they brought him back to Pine Falls, he resigned from his position that same day. It took 3 weeks before he would describe what had happened. He said he had entered the oak grove just after 3:30, with perhaps an hour of daylight remaining. The horse was already agitated, pulling against the bit. Halfway through the grove, it stopped. Sims dismounted, intending to lead it on foot. That was when he noticed the silence. He said it was not merely the absence of sound. It was a thickness, a pressure in the air, as though the forest were holding its breath. He tried to pull the horse forward. It would not move. Its eyes were fixed on something ahead, something Sims could not see. He looked where the horse was looking. The road ahead curved slightly to the left, disappearing between the trees. Nothing was visible, no movement, no shape. But Sims said he felt it, an awareness, cold and patient, standing just beyond the curve. He mounted quickly and tried to turn the horse around. It reared. He was thrown. The horse bolted south, leaving him on the ground. Sims said he did not remember getting to his feet. He did not remember walking. But he knew. He was certain that he should not look back. He walked south. He did not stop until he was out of the trees. When the search party retrieved his mail bag the next day, they found it lying in the center of the road, near the split oak. No horse tracks, no signs of struggle, just the bag, placed carefully upright, as though set down by hand. By 1906, the road to the oak grove had become a problem the county could no longer ignore. Mail delivery had been rerouted. Farmers were demanding improvements to the southern road, which was poorly maintained and prone to flooding. The county board discussed options. Widening the Northwest Road was the obvious solution. It was shorter, better graded, and required less drainage work. That was when William Garrett was hired to survey the route. Garrett was a practical man. He had worked for the county for 12 years. He had surveyed roads through swamps, over mountains, across land disputed by hostile property owners. He was not superstitious. When the board mentioned, almost casually, that locals had concern about the Northwest Road, he dismissed it as rural nonsense. His notebook shows he began work on October 2nd, 1907. He started at the southern end of the route, working north. By October 9th, he had reached the Oak Grove. The first entry from that section is routine. Measurements, notes about drainage, a sketch of the road's curve. But on October 10th, the notes change. Horses reluctant, had to lead them. No obvious cause. October 11th, horses refused to enter the grove, left them a quarter-mile back, proceeded on foot. October 12th, unable to work past midday, feeling of being watched, irrational but persistent, will return tomorrow. October 13th, did not return. The next entry is dated October 17th, on a different road entirely. But there's a loose page tucked into the back of Garrett's notebook, undated, written in a hurried hand that is barely legible. It was not part of the official report. It may have been meant as a draft or a note to himself. The Historical Society found it pressed between the notebook's final pages during digitization in 2004. It reads, "I do not expect anyone to believe this. I am not sure I believe it myself. But I need to write it down while the details are still clear. I returned to the grove alone on the afternoon of the 13th. I told myself I was being foolish, that I needed to complete the survey and move on. The weather was clear. It was just after 2 o'clock. Plenty of daylight. I walked into the grove with my tools. I set up the transit near the split oak and began taking measurements. I worked for perhaps 20 minutes. Everything was normal. And then the light changed. I do not mean the sun when behind clouds. I mean the quality of light under the trees shifted. It became dimmer, though the sky above was still bright. The shadows lengthened, though the angle of the sun had not changed. It was as though dusk had arrived only in that one place. I stopped working. I looked around. The forest was silent. Not a leaf moved. Not a branch creaked. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the stillness. And then I heard footsteps. They were behind me, slow, deliberate, heavy, not the sound of boots on dirt, but something dragging, scraping, irregular rhythm. I turned. Nothing. The road was empty. The trees were empty. But the sound did not stop. It was coming closer. I could not see what was making it, but I could hear it clearly. 10 feet away, then 5. I have been in the woods my entire life. I know the sounds animals make. This was not an animal. I picked up my equipment and walked. I did not run. I do not know why. Perhaps because running felt like an admission, and I did not want to admit what I was feeling. But I walked quickly, and I did not look back. The footsteps followed me for perhaps 100 yards. Then they stopped, all at once, as though whatever was making them had simply decided to let me go. I did not return to finish the survey. I told the county board the road was unsuitable for expansion due to unstable soil conditions. That was a lie. The soil is fine, but I will not go back there. I will not ask anyone else to go either. There is something wrong in that grove. Not dangerous, necessarily. Not hostile, but wrong. Patient. Waiting, and it knows when you are there. The road expansion was approved in December 1907, but the final route bypassed the Oak Grove entirely. The official explanation cited engineering challenges and cost efficiency. No further details were provided. The old road remained passable, but fell into disuse. By 1910, most travelers had forgotten it existed. Fences encroached. Brush reclaimed the edges. The split oak stood alone, visible from a new road only if you knew where to look. In 1912, the Lutheran Church in Millhaven closed due to declining membership. Reverend Alcott had left 2 years earlier, transferring to a parish in Connecticut. His diary remained in the church archive and was donated to the Historical Society in 1954. William Garrett continued working as a surveyor until his retirement in 1923. He never returned to Dutchess County. His notebook was found among his personal effects after his death in 1931. Horace Sims, the mail carrier, left New York entirely. Census records place him in Ohio in 1910, working as a clerk. He did not marry. He died in 1947. No obituary mentions his time as a postal carrier. There are no records of accidents on the Northwest Road after 1907, for the simple reason that almost no one used it. A few hunters, perhaps the occasional hiker. But the locals knew to stay away, and newcomers learned quickly enough. In 1923, a state forestry crew working in the area reported that several of their horses refused to enter a section of old road near Millhaven. The crew supervisor noted in his log, but did not investigate. They completed their work elsewhere. In 1955, a survey team mapping rural roads for a county modernization project photographed the old Northwest Road. The photograph showed the split oak still standing, much larger than descriptions from 1907 suggest. The road beneath it is nearly invisible, covered in leaves. One photograph, taken facing north through the grove, shows something unusual. In the lower right corner, barely visible among the shadows, there's a shape too regular to be a tree, too still to be a person. The shape is blurred, as though it moved just as a shutter clicked, or as though the camera could not quite focus on it. The survey team's report makes no mention of it. The photograph is filed in the Dutchess County Archives. It has been digitized. You can request a copy. There is a question people ask when they hear stories like this, and it is always the same question: what was it? But that is the wrong question. The people who lived in Millhaven did not ask what it was. They asked whether it was safe to travel the road at night, whether their horses would refuse to pass, whether the feeling in the oak grove was something they could ignore or something they needed to respect. They did not need a name for it. They needed to know how to live near it. Reverend Alcott wrote in his diary, "There are places in this world that do not want us, not actively, not violently, but they do not want us. And we know this not through reason, but through something older, a sense that predates language. The animals know it. We know it too, if we are willing to listen." William Garrett never explained what he heard in the grove. He only said, in a letter to a colleague years later, that some roads are not worth improving. The oak grove is still there. The trees are older now. The split oak finally fell in a storm in 1983, and no one replaced it. The road is gone, reclaimed entirely by the forest. You would not know it had ever existed unless someone showed you where to look. But on certain autumn afternoons, when the light is failing and the air turns cold, there are still people in Dutchess County who will not walk through that section of woods. They will not say why. They do not need to. Some things do not require explanation. They require only acknowledgement, a quiet agreement passed down through generations that there are places we do not go, not because we have been forbidden, but because we have been told, softly and without malice, that we are not welcome there. And the knowing, the deep animal knowing, is enough. The surveyor's notebook sits in a climate-controlled archive in Poughkeepsie. The loose page is still pressed in the back. The line in the margin still reads, "Horses will not pass the oak grove. Tried 4 times. They know something." He never wrote what they knew. Perhaps he did not need to. Perhaps we already know.